another Monday, and we're here again. So, as usual, we will start with a prayer. And if you feel comfortable closing your eyes, feel free to do it. Dear Lord, we are here again, and we would like to start saying thank you for the opportunity to be here. Also, we would like to ask you your blessings for everyone who will work tonight as a volunteer, doing the reading, the lecture, the passes. And please extend your blessings to everyone. Help us to leave our concerns outside and help us to be connected with Jesus at this moment. And we ask your permission to start our meeting tonight. So be it. Okay. Sorry. Well, tonight we will read. The message came from the book Our Daily Bread. The number of the message is 112, and the name is Eternal Tabernacles. I tell you, use worldly to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Who said this was Jesus? It is in Luke 16:9. An individual unaware of his spiritual obligations will consider that he finds in this passage an intelligent thief buying the favors of mercenary attorneys in order to reintegrate in the honorable titles of human convention. However, when Jesus spoke of friends, he was referring to sincere and consecrated brothers. When he referred to the reach of injustice, he was including the total past life of the individual, involving all of the painful lessons that characterize it. In the same manner, when he referred to the eternal tabernacles, he did not place them on a celestial stage. The Master situated the sacred tabernacle in the heart of man. More than anyone, the Savior identified our imperfections and viewing us with immense pity due to the deficiencies existing in our spirits. He uttered the divine words that will be helpful for our studies. Being cognizant of our errors, he affirmed in essence that we should take advantage of the transitory riches at our reach, actively involving us in the legitimate fraternity, in order that by forgetting our crimes and hatred of other times, we became true brothers, one with the other. Let us evaluate in this manner the permanence of our service on earth, while incarnates or as discarnates, favoring all the resources at our disposal, the personal improvement and the elevation of our fellow men, participating in the direction of the light and always loving. By living within these norms of sublime solidarity, we will always be able to count on the dedication of faithful friends who, being dedicated disciples more noble than we, will be able to assist us effectively by taking us into their hearts, converted in tabernacles of the Lord. They will assist us not only to obtain new opportunities of readjustment and sanctification, but also by endorsing our promises and aspirations before Jesus regarding the superior life. I don't know who was here last month in August. It was me. I read the message 111. The title was Win Friends. And this one looks like kind of connect with the other one, like part 1, part 2, saying about friends, how to win friends and connect with friends, respect your friends, and get new friends also. But not just friends in the exactly meaning, but meaning your neighbors also. But before we start, I think the title says Eternal Tabernacles. I think we should double check what tabernacles means. I saw in the dictionary, of course, in the biblical meaning, it says a fixed or movable habitation, typically a light construction, a small thing. Or it could be another meaning, a meeting place for worship used by some Protestants or Mormons. Other dictionaries also brought to us could be, do you know that box they use in the church, the Catholic Church, where the priests put the stuff in there? Say it again. Yeah, that they will use in the Mass. They also has this name. And what's the purpose of the tabernacles? And I got something here. They said in Jewish history, the portable sanctuary, because this small box, let's say box to be easy to explain, sanctuary box, constructed by Moses as a place of worship for the Hebrew tribes during the period of wandering that preceded their arrival in the promised land. Okay. Also could be a sanctuary place and a tent. And going deeper, I found that according to the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, tabernacle was the place in earth where God lives. It means the God's address in earth. But God has an address in earth? Has been living here? No. But when we see that another translation, another meaning about this word, the tabernacle also is the human body, we understand that the God lives in us, in every single person. So the sanctuary, the tabernacle, the holy place that God lives in this earth is inside every single one of us in this planet. So I think it's so important to understand this first before we go ahead. And then in the second paragraph, he says, he mentioned about the moment we live, the injustice. Sometimes we find ourselves living a situation that we think is not fair, or we are living. And it says that we have to situate ourselves where we are now, to understand where we are now, and to understand who are you in this planet, in this moment, now. We just can understand this when we understand that we live many lives. So when you see people in better situation than you, or some people are in worse situation than you will see that there is many lives. This is not the only life we live. And the last paragraph, it says, by living within these norms of sublime solidarity, so talking about solidarity, we will always be able to count on the dedication of faithful friends. Who is the faithful friend? Jesus is the top, right, the master, but also the faithful friends are our angel guardians and also the good spirits. They are always there to help us. Every single one has angel to help us out during our whole life. And it says, this angel, this good spirit, being dedicated disciples more noble than we, they are more noble than us, they are better than us, their level is higher than us, will be able to assist us effectively by taking us into their hearts, converted in tabernacles of the Lord. So who represents us with Jesus is our angels. So try to be good and understand that God lives inside us. Thank you very much. I hope you guys like it. And let's invite our friend Hendrick for tonight's lecture. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Nancy. It's always a pleasure to be here. We ask that God gives us His blessing, that Jesus inspires us, and the good spirits inspire us this evening, so we can have a good conversation about the second part of chapter 6 of the Gospel according to Spiritism. Which is entitled Christ the Consoler. Last month, I believe it was Flavio was here talking about the gentle yoke. Jesus' invitation back in Matthew 11:28-30, where He says, "Come unto me, ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Reminding us that Jesus was always seeking those who suffer, seeking those who need relief, those who need comfort, those who need to be consoled. And so, you know, his mission in this world can be said, can certainly be, we can certainly point to, you know, how many people he helped and went after, who were sufferers of all different kinds, from you know, people who had been born blind, who he helped, you know, helped see again, to those who were persecuted, to those who, the publicans who, you know, would collect taxes, right? The tax collectors. And so we can say for sure that Jesus's life, whole life, he was involved and constantly dealing with those who suffered. Later in his life, and so, and you know, when we look at the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 6, 5 and 6, sorry, you know, one of his beatitudes is, you know, he starts, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted," and so on. So, the message that Jesus brought to us of a God of love, you know, a God that you know, has given us life but gives us love every day, you know, has always been put in this under the light of, or you know, has always been very much about suffering and you know, penance and you know, recovering and being comforted and so on. And he realized, and you know, as he is coming to the end of his life physically here in the amongst his disciples, you know, as he arrived in Jerusalem and he sits with his disciples, getting ready to have the Last Supper. Before that, he washes his disciples' feet, right? In chapter 14 of John, he describes that. He describes him talking about a betrayal that's to come, to say, you know, one of you will betray me. You know, and all the disciples are shocked and wondering what's, you know, how that's possible. And then he says, "You, Peter, you will deny me 3 times." And you know, Peter says, "That's never going to happen. You know, that's not going to happen." And he's saying, you know, and I have very little time with you. You know, you've known me here, but I have very, very little time left. And so he starts. So in the next chapter, John 14, he starts, you know, talking to his disciples, and you know, in the translation, the New International Version translation, it divides the chapter 14 of John into three little parts, verses. And the first one says, Jesus comforts his disciples, where he says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My house has my Father's house has many mansions, you know, and you know, and I will go and I'll prepare a place for all of you to come and be with me." And he's saying, you know, I am the way to God. You know, Thomas asks him, you know, we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way? He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And you know, through me, you will reach God's kingdom. But in the next little section, verse 15, is where, you know, we start our study tonight, where he promises a consoler, He calls it the Holy Spirit. Different translations translate it differently. In this translation here, they call him the Advocate, someone, this consoler that will come and advocate for you. Different translations say Comforter, Consoler, etc. The title of the Gospel according to Spiritism being the Consoler. Kardec, I guess, has chosen that word, even its original in French, to bring forth the Spiritist interpretation of this passage and the general idea behind this promise that Jesus makes. So in John 14, number 15 and 16 and 17, he says, "If you love me, keep my commands, and I will ask the Father, and he will give you another Comforter, Advocate, to help you and be with you forever." It's a promise from Jesus to those who are embarking upon his message and are becoming Christians and essentially understanding God as he brought the message to us, that and obviously speaking to the disciples themselves at the time, there's just too many things that I couldn't have said. There are just too many things that the world cannot accept right now, right? So it says, 17, "The Spirit of truth, the Word cannot accept him because it neither sees him nor knows him, but you know him, for he lives with you and he will be with you." And so Jesus is getting the disciples ready to continue his work for him at this moment. And what he promises is that eventually there will come a time when the message, the ideas that he has brought, having been this, God's messenger at that time, 2,000 plus years ago, that eventually there would come a time when, the Spirit of truth, as he puts it here, would come and clarify things that were not so clear at the time and not very attainable from the mindset of the people at that time. So he says this consoler, this advocate, the Holy Spirit, who the Father will send in my name, will teach you all things and will remind you of everything that I have said to you. Will remind you of everything that I have said to you. But it does say, will teach you all the things and will remind you of everything that I have said to you. And, he finishes that part saying, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give it to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid." So, in his final hours, his final evening, before he is arrested, before he is to be crucified, Jesus, leaves his disciples, and therefore us, the Christians that have received this message through the work of these disciples and Paul the apostle and all of those that came after them. He leaves this promise that the Spirit of truth will come later. And so as you start to read, as you look through history, through the history of religion in general, you see that there's that there's been different views of what or who this consoler or comforter is, and different Christian denominations have decided to assign that to different people or entities after after a while, and then there's the idea that God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit are all one and the same, and there's all of that discussion about that. But one thing that stands clear is that not everything got clarified, right? Not everything, especially in the main aspects of what Jesus came here and did, which was to relieve the suffering of those around him, and to work and to deal with people who suffered. And so, if this consoler or comforter had already come, then a question remained: how does the world, especially the Christian world, the West, the Europe, etc., in the last thousands of years, never really reached the point where everybody lived happily as proposed, as suggested by Jesus, that we would eventually come to be. Instead, we see pain all around us, right? We've seen pain from since he left, and it's still around us. The problem hasn't been solved, or perhaps the problem just hasn't been understood. And so Kardec, of course, through through working with the spirits of the codification of Spiritism, proposed that this consoler would have to be one that explains God, would be one that explains justice of God, and therefore helps you understand the reasons, the source of pain, right? So, how do we explain suffering? How do we explain the suffering of a child that was born with a tumor and dies, within the first couple of years of their lives? How do we explain the suffering to the mother who had that child? How do we explain the suffering of somebody who was already born blind, and yet overcomes that and becomes a master in whatever craft, right? How many musicians don't use their eyesight and yet are wonderful musicians or singers, etc., right? How do you explain the suffering of we obviously, it's easy to think of children because they're innocent, and how can, if God really is just and wouldn't be unjust to someone who has no sin, if you will, then how does he how does God give puts those people through suffering? Or how is it that people are born here versus people are born in Africa, people are born in Asia or Europe, and grow up in completely different economic situations that cause different sufferings for different reasons, right? Whether it be mental disturbances, whether it be financial, depression, or etc., right? I mean, people are born into a lot of money, and yet they suffer their entire lives of depression, feeling like they've never really accomplished anything, and so on and so forth. The other way around, people who are hungry through their entire lives because they were born in a situation and are never able to get out of the abject poverty that they were born into. And so, when we look at that, um, at those at such suffering, the typical answer has been, or why do we suffer? You can look at it. Typically, religion, Christian faith, and in general, I guess all of the faiths that have come from Abraham, say, okay, well, God just wanted you to suffer, and it's God, so just accept it, right? And God says so. So why do you hurt? Why do you suffer? Well, because God said so. And it's been hundreds, 1,000+ years of this sort of explanation, right? Where I don't really know what it is that I did to God to make him be angry at me like this, but something I did, right? And then some people accept that. On the other side, you have people just being just purely rational and saying there's no way, none of this is just, and so therefore there is no God, and it was just luck. And so there's no God, so there's nothing I need to do about that either. And I will just live my life to the best that I can. I don't care about anybody else. I'll look at myself, my family at best, and work with just that, and try to get rid of my suffering, but understanding that the world is unjust, and it is what it is. Right? That's a very simplistic explanation. But when you see the message of God being loving, God being forgiving, God being not wanting you to suffer, and yet your pastor or your priest or your mom or whoever says, well, it's still God making you suffer, and that's it. How can you think there's justice? How can you truly learn not to suffer if that's all you hear? All right, and therefore, be rational. And then, as a third scenario, there's also those who really don't face a lot of suffering, and yet are very religious or mystical, or and have a very simple understanding of suffering and pain because they see it in others and say, you see, yeah. God, it's too bad God, made those children suffer, or God made, my neighbor suffer, and just assume that it's with everybody else. And yet, when something comes, and knocks at your door, all of a sudden at that point, well, where's God? What's God doing to me? Why is God forsaken me, etc.? And why am I suffering? I've been with God, etc. So, through time, you could say that people have looked at it at this problem in general in this way. But if we look at Paul. If we go read Paul in his letters to the Corinthians, he does, in sort of his invitation to the new Christians who are starting to spread the word of Christ and learning and trying to live the Christian life, the life of Christ, right? Follow Christ, and he himself realizes even then, that you need to be thankful to God for the sufferings. And, in one example that I was reading in Corinthians 2, I think, he says, it is through our sufferings, just as Jesus suffered and we have learned from his suffering, it is now our part. It's now it's now in our hands to suffer, right? We because through our suffering, those who we help who are suffering will understand and will be, closer to the message that we are trying, to spread of the love of God. And so he invites us to be thankful for suffering, right? But that kind of doesn't make a lot of sense. If I have one life and once I'm done, I'm done. I should do good, maybe, if I believe in God. But why do I need to suffer? I just need to do good, right? And I will try to escape any suffering that I can, and yet Paul, in that letter, he says, just as we share in the sufferings of Christ, they will share with us. And so there was something missing in that message. I think is part of what Kardec realized, and part of the work that came with the arrival of Spiritism and our wonderful philosophy, doctrine, however you want to put it. But in that recognition that something else was missing. How is it that I can, see all the suffering, that I can see all of this going on, and still believe that God is just and there is a just cause to everything? And so, as Kardec points out in his general explanation, he says, the world did not know this spirit of truth, and up to this point, when we're looking at Spiritism, because we were just not mature enough to start seeing these truths of a certainty of a later life, of a spiritual life, of a certainty that we have lived before, and that we will continue to live past the end of this physical life. And and so the message that has arrived with Spiritism, as he says, comes to answer some of these notes that or suggestions that Jesus Christ himself had left for us. Admitted that he did not tell us everything, and that this spirit of truth would come and give us more. It also, and so as he says, as Jesus says, listen, all those who have ears to hear, eyes to see, and ears to hear. This is the message that he promised. This is the comfort and comforter that Jesus has promised us back then, before we could approach this knowledge, this message with a new outlook on it. And so Spiritism brings, so we think about, all right, so how can Spiritism itself then be this consoler? And as I was listening to some comments by Haroldo Dutra Dias, he points out that once we look at Spiritism and for its three main aspects, we can see that this is indeed this promised this doctrine, this philosophy, this religion is the promised consoler that Jesus had promised to us. Starting from the practical aspects, right? Spiritism invites us, allows us to ask and seek these questions and answers that Kardec himself and many after him have have been seeking and getting answers to about what about how the spiritual world works. What are we doing here? Why do I exist? Where am I going after this? Where have I come from? And our ability to sit and have mediumship meetings, as laid out in the medium and in the book of mediums, in the mediums books, which came before the gospel according to spiritism. He's basically leaving it open. Says, look, this is the message. These are the spirits that have been bringing us. We've done a lot of work to compile all of these answers, to compile all of these messages, to bring this to light, and to confirm that we're not just listening to one medium here or another medium there. There was a lot of work to get all of that, all of this work of this message that was brought to us in these, in the Spirits book, the Mediums book, the Gospel According to Spiritism, the next two. All of this work that went into it to make sure that these answers are coming in consistently the same, and that we could and we can believe these spirits communicating with us. There are many, and there were many other spiritualist type of groups that have communicated with spirits since the beginning of ages and the beginning of humanity. And this approach that he took with the spirits was one of a more scientific, if you will, approach of going through and with different mediums in different locations from different countries, getting the messages across, and understanding that this was indeed that one could indeed believe the message. And not only that, left all the instructions of how can we do it ourselves. How could you put together a study group? How could you put together a mediums group to communicate with spirits and seek your own answers, etc.? And to this day, hundreds of books have been published. Thousands of books probably have been published. With communications with spirits, different people doing different work to communicate with spirits. And so we have this first aspect of spiritism as a practical aspect, where you don't have to believe everybody else. You can do it yourself. And obviously there's a lot of care that has to be taken. There's a lot of it's not something you just go and do without thinking about it and working to ensure that you're communicating with spirits that are going to be helpful to you, and that you can be helpful to them. But it's all there, and you can choose to believe or you can choose to try, but it's all there. First aspect. Second aspect, an aspect that challenges us, that makes us think, that teaches us to think our spirituality, to question our spirituality, to think about why we do the things we do. So we don't. So in Spiritism, we don't come in to a meeting and say, "Oh, let's all." I see you're suffering or whatever you're going through. Here's a blue rock that's going to help you, with no intention of explaining that, or Spiritism is the other way around. Is question the blue rock. Maybe it will do good for you, right? Question everything that has been said before by other religions, by by those who have brought the message forward so far, and think about your spirituality, right? It's the sort of the philosophical ideas behind Spiritism. So Spiritism didn't come to just say this is true, this is the truth, we are the truth, or these 5 books are the truth, or this is the one true spirit that says all the truth. It's not that at all. It's here is the knowledge that we've compiled. Here are the questions that we've asked. Here's how you can approach it, and you can go do it yourself, right? Going back to the practical aspect. But here are some of the answers, questions that we asked, and some of the answers that it has given us, and therefore it helps us understand this justice of this God. So we don't say we're not looking for where God is. First of all, we asked, what is God, right? We asked, as Kardec asked, what is God, to the spirits that were helping. And it was that understanding and that questioning that brings us the knowledge that allows us to think of the big questions in life. Who are we? What are we doing here? What is my purpose? Why do we suffer? And all of that. And so as we start looking at, you have gone through previous lives. Those that have come before you, they have gone through lives before, and they are now in a spiritual state, and you can communicate with them. And and that will often console a mother that has lost a child. That will often help us help one person through their feeling to get an understanding of the love of what it means to be touched and be loved by God. So when Kardec's pointing out here, it says Christ said, "Blessed are the afflicted, for they shall be consoled." But how can anyone feel fortunate, excuse me, if they do not know why they suffer? Right? Spiritism shows us, you've gone through past lives. This world that we are in is a world of atonement. It's a world of trials, tribulations, and we are here to understand and to learn from this experience to grow and become better spirits, right? And this idea of going through some suffering and being made to do something is not a novel idea. When we think, well, but if God really loves me, he should just be making me happy. And if that's not true, even for a child in this life, imagine how not true that is to us as spirits, in the eternity of our existence, right? So I was, funny enough, I was reading an article this afternoon. I'm sorry, mentioning this woman I think it's Wojcicki, something like that, her last name, and she grew up very poor, somewhat poor. Her 2 parents were worked, and she grew up with not much in her house, and eventually realized that she would have to get an education to grow, etc. She got a degree in journalism. I forget where from, doesn't really matter. And when she had her kids, she had 3 daughters. she realized she decided, well, I'm going to give them a different experience than I was given. And one thing she realizes is she says, I will never give them anything. Or, she kind of describes it that way. It's kind of hard to believe, that per se, but, the idea was anything that they want, they need to earn. They need to do something for it, or they need to do it for themselves. Well, she wrote, and this is because this woman wrote a book called How to Raise Successful Kids. She has 3 daughters. 2 of them are CEO of major companies. One is the CEO of YouTube, which is kind of part of Google, but it's its own thing. The other is the CEO of 23andMe. It's a kit for DNA sampling. One of them is worth $200 million or something. The other 400 something right now, and the other one is not very successful. She's just a PhD in researching, childhood abuse, obesity, and she's a pediatrician and so on. So not very successful, right? She might actually be happier than the other 2, but whatever. So we're not talking about money, right? In the end, ultimately, that wasn't the idea, right? But if that works here, where you can say, look, little kids, you make them, you don't just give them what they want. They will eventually learn for themselves and they will succeed. Imagine what that means in our lives, with God. So, we go back to Paul saying you should be thankful for all the suffering, all the pain, right? And then the third aspect, as we said, 2 aspects, being the practical, experimental sort of side. The second one, this idea of making us think about our spirituality, thinking about why in life, and to build up our faith to be, as he puts it here, unshakable. Then you really need to think. But ultimately, that's all to really reconnect us with God. So the religious aspect, that the aspect of, as the word in Latin says, religare, to bind, right, to reconnect, to connect us to God, to divinity, such that we can go and reach for that love that God, that Jesus has told us that is waiting for us, right? Jesus, I was trying to think about, Jesus says, "Oh, I'm the way, right? I'm the path," and and it's like, you look at the land. And Jesus came and just made that path and says, here it is. Just go to this path. At the end, it's God, it's happiness, it's love, it's fulfillment. But we're not looking from above. We're just walking on the ground, and sometimes we're like, well, maybe it was this other path here, and then we go over there, and maybe there's a shortcut over here on the right, and so so Spiritism comes to kind of give us that GPS feeling, right? Where now you're going this way and you kind of know where you're supposed to go, but you still see, there's a lot of traffic over here. I'm just going to take a right. And then you take that right, and then the thing goes recalculating. And then you go over there and it keeps recalculating, trying to get you back to the main way. But that's more typical for man, right? The guys always think they have a better sense of direction. No, I know it's that way over there, and then the GPS goes, recalculating. so Spiritism gives us that ability for us to see where we're going, to understand where we came from, to obviously shape our own way of our own understanding. It presents us with the knowledge of this afterlife and what we ought to be aspiring to and growing towards God, the supreme intelligence of the universe, creator of everything, and so through these and many other ways that we obviously don't have the time to discuss and go in details here, Spiritism then realizes this promise that Jesus has left us of a consoler that he would send to us as Spiritism, and this I'm reading again from Kardec here, brings us the knowledge of those things which allow men to know where he came from, where he's going, and why he is on earth, and therefore attracting mankind to the true principles of God's law and offering consolation through faith and hope. This faith that becomes, that becomes not a faith of I believe in God, or I believe this is my path, or I believe that I believe in Jesus, or I believe in this message. It's really I know this message. I understand this message. I can now live this message. And that is the invitation that Spiritism has to all of us. And tough to judge ourselves on how well we do, but with the knowledge and understanding and the faith and hope that we can progress towards towards God and that ultimate degree of becoming better people, better spirits, better beings. Spiritism is there to be that GPS bringing us back, hopefully, over and over again. And I think, as Jesus said here, I leave my peace with you, and peace to us all. I hope this was a helpful discussion to everyone, and thank you for your attention, and God bless us all. Good evening. Thank you.